Have you ever thought you knew what you were doing and then found out you hadn't? I recorded this whole video and then realized I was still set on photo on this iPad, and so I didn't record anything. So let's start again. Reflecting on my classroom practices in this one-to-one environment that we are in Hoover City Schools. This has changed the way I teach completely. It has transformed my classroom. I could do some of the things I'm doing now, but it would be very, very difficult to do so, and I can't even imagine making the attempt, quite frankly. My students are more engaged than they have been in a long time, even if they don't necessarily want to be. You know, it's easier to be a passive learner, to sit back and just take it in and hope you get lucky with what questions are asked on a test and which activities you get to do. This method does not give that opportunity to students. Students have to be actively engaged. They have to take ownership of what they're doing. My journey down this path started last year when we got the iPads. I decided that I was no longer satisfied with the sort of passive environment that lacked engagement in my students. And I experimented first in my AP classes with flipped classroom, and it worked beautifully with that particular group of students. They really enjoyed it. They jumped in with me wholeheartedly and learned a lot from it. And I decided that I needed something else for my regular students. For several years, I have one unit that I've done that I've been very proud of, that I designed, that was, I didn't know there was a word for it, but I let students sort of contract for their grade using a choice menu system. They could pick X number of activities from this menu and earn a C, add on these activities from a different menu and earn a B, or add on these additional and earn an A. Students have always liked that project, but I wasn't really sure if they liked it because of the choices or if it was because of the content. It was on civil liberties. I mean, who's not interested in what your rights are and being able to apply those? Or if it was a little bit of both. And so this summer I decided to do some research, and I read a book by Alan November called Who Owns the Learning? It got me thinking more and made me more dissatisfied with the traditional method of teaching I've used for over 20 years. But it really, the ideas it gave me were more whole class ideas than individualized ideas. Then I read a book called Classroom Habitudes by Angela Myers. And hers, I think, was really more geared towards elementary, middle school, or for an advisory class. It's a good book, but it didn't really inform my teaching. I joined the book group on Teach Like a Pirate by Dave Burgess, and it had some really cool ideas in there. But again, they called for me to be sort of that sage on the stage, and I was pedagogically moving away from that idea as a preferred method. So I continued my research as school started. And I was using search terms like choice and anything that you know was sort of a synonym of the word choice on the internet, and I was having really no success in finding what I was looking for. And then until I got to one site, and I really don't remember what the site was, but it told me there was another term or another phrase I should be looking up, and that phrase is layered curriculum. And once I put that one in Google, it opened me up to a world of choices. And so I've stepped on the shoulders of some giants like Mr. Roughton. I don't know where he's from, but he has a beautifully robust site full of all kinds of activity ideas that you could do if you're offering student choice. And I read deeper about other teachers and how they have implemented this kind of a plan and began to, build on their ideas. So I have jumped full in. That tends to be my habit, whether it's a hobby or professionally. If I decide something's a really good idea and I'm committed to it, I jump in and I'm fully engaged in the idea from that point forward. And starting with our third unit of the first semester in regular, we jumped into this layered curriculum model. My model is tied to Bloom's taxonomy. If students are satisfied staying at those bottom two rungs of Bloom's, remembering and understanding, they have a list of choices of activities to show that they remember and understand the content. and they have to do a certain number of those, and they earn a C. Now, before they can do those activities, they have to acquire content knowledge, and this is where I pulled the flip back in. I either record my own flipped lectures for students and put them up, or I curate resources from around the web. You know, there's so much more there than there was even a year ago on YouTube from other teachers who have in professional foundations, etc., on the content of my course. And so I either curate resources or I record them myself if I can't find what I want. I also provide reading sources as an option for those students that prefer to read. So first they gain that content knowledge, then they do activities to reinforce it. For level 1, those again are activities tied to the bottom 2 layers of blooms. So maybe flashcards or Venn diagrams or, you know, other kinds of graphic organizers, short videos and reflecting on them, that kind of thing. If they want to push themselves up a little bit and earn a higher grade, students they go to the layer 2 choices and they add those on to the layer 1. Layer 2 are meant to hit the next 2 rungs of blooms, application and analysis. And so those think a little deeper. Maybe they do brain chains or mind maps. And then if they want an A, they've got to push themselves to the top of blooms. They've got to evaluate, create, analyze, synthesize. And those activities, maybe they create a video tutorial for other students or a learning playlist that would teach someone how to teach somebody about a topic from sources they've curated on the web about that topic. The other aspect that I added, though, you know, it's hard sometimes to know our students doing the work themselves, and so I really wanted some accountability. And I didn't want to do it with a typical paper and pencil test. I wanted a more personal method there. So I started doing personal student assessments through interviews. And so the first semester, I started with personal interviews on all content matter. And they would have to sit down with me one-to-one or in a very small group, and I could ask them questions, I could probe for understanding, I could see where the conversation led. Rather than students being dependent on whatever multiple choice questions I put on a test, it was a much more interactive type of assessment. And once I got over the sort of nervousness of, oh gosh, I have to sit down and talk to my teacher one-on-one, really? Most of them really liked it. Of course, after we finished the first unit, I did a feedback survey and asked them, what do you like, what do you don't like, what works well, what doesn't, and kept doing that as the semester progressed. I found there were some students who really, really liked those tests. And so that was given as an option for students in that second half, in that second 9 weeks, that they could do those personal interviews or they could do the tests. Most continued to do the interviews. And I had a smaller student population first semester because I had a couple sections of AP, and so it was quite manageable to do that. For my exam, I decided that a typical test was not fair. We hadn't taken one since the 1st of September, and so I gave an exam of video essays where I provided questions to each class. Each class had a different set of questions, one for every unit plus an overall question where they'd have to tie in material from several units. And I put them into Moodle, which is what I use, and the Moodle randomly selected 3 of those questions for them. But they had been given all of them in advance to prepare for. And then their instructions were to video record their answer. And it should not exceed 5 minutes, and they would upload the 3 questions Moodle gave them. They were encouraged to do it from home. I opened the exam up the night before their exam time, you know, if they had, because the internet service was going to be better for upload. But they were welcome to do it here too if they needed. Had the best exam scores I've ever had in 23 years. So I think it was a definite success. Re-rack to second semester. I get to start all over, 1 semester class. And so, you know, my numbers were a lot higher this time. No AP sections. I have 5 full sections of regular. And my class load basically doubled as far as regular students. So I decided that the individual interviews might not be manageable. So I've given a test option for every unit, and we just started the 4th unit. On personal reflection, not as good. The personal interviews are better. I've added them back with the 3rd unit that I really encourage them to do those more. Just a few kids are doing them, though. And I think on further reflection on that one next semester in the fall, We're going to start with the personal interviews, and I will only allow the other as an option after an extension of time. So, personal reflection. Things that I take away from this. I have really increased student engagement this year, and I am all in teaching this way. Secondly, student feedback is really important because every group of kids is different. You know, I said the flipped classroom worked beautifully last school year when I tried it. With this year's group, it wasn't as successful. So I'm going to modify that for next year and then do a lot of feedback again. With the layered curriculum class, I'm fully vested in this idea now. And so changes I will make, I will go back to the personal interviews next fall. I think those are important. I get to know the kids. I get to really see what they know, and I get to probe for what they know. The test as an option will be offered sort of as a last option, and I may not offer them on the first couple of units. I am constantly looking for new choices, especially level 3 is the hardest for me. It's hard to find and quantify ways that they can show that top level of Bloom's learning without doing basically the same old thing over and over again. So I'm always looking for things for that. Level 1, super easy, typical homework kinds of things. Level 2, not so difficult either, because I've always done a lot of homework that included a lot of application and analysis. It's just that top of Bloom's that's been difficult for me. Just from a perspective of wanting to give them more choices, because I think that's really important. I think it's important for students to own the learning. Sometimes they don't like it. They've become very accustomed to being very passive learners. This pushes them beyond their comfort zone, and I think that I am gifting them with something very important by teaching them to take ownership, to push themselves, to be independent learners, and to ask for what they need. You know, because they're about to leave here. I teach seniors, and they need this is a lifelong learning skill that they need. So what does this look like? Here you see a QR code for interview sign-ups for the current unit that we're doing. That's for students to sign up for those mastery interviews. You see some level 1 choices. These are pretty typical, illustrated timelines. There's some online games and simulations they can do. Here's a crossword puzzle that I created with an app that I have. That's a level 1 activity. I have a variety of templates I've found in different places. This shows you some that they have to choose from. This one shows cycle of events. Sometimes I'll have a create a graphic organizer and they can use one of the templates I've provided. For level 2, here's some examples. One of these I really like is the social media and political behavior activity. Lets them work individually or with a partner to analyze some infographics that I've prepared for them or provided for them. For level 3, you can see some of the choices. It gets harder to find those level 3 options, but one that I created that I've used now twice is to create a theme park where they create rides, eating establishments, gift shops, etc., all to evaluate and synthesize that knowledge that they've gained throughout this. So how does learning look in this classroom? They sit in collaborative groups. Students are busy working on different activities all the time because learning has become very individualized for students in this model. And you'll notice that, you know, it takes different shapes and forms. Some students work more individually as they are comfortable. Some students even work on laptops in the classroom that I have available if they don't have an iPad available to them or to play games. They are comfortable in this environment, I think, as you can see from their faces, and I encourage them to sit where they're the most comfortable, even if that's on the floor, up against the wall, plugged up to the wall if necessary for charging of their iPads. So I hope that you've enjoyed this reflection and this look at a little bit of what I've been doing this year. I continue to self-reflect and hope you enjoy this journey with me. By the way, this is a good reason why I don't always record my own videos. I get kind of long-winded.